far away from my friend and relation, betrayed by the black velvet band.
Hello, hello. Welcome to the Shropshire Witches. I'm Alex.
And I'm Amy.
And we are very excited to be back with you after what is a couple of 3 weeks off. We're back here with a new season and some new episodes. Tonight, we are discussing none other than the history of sex appeal, which seems quite broad stroke, but, we're going to navigate our way through this. I'm rather excited about this. Amy, I know we've been messaging. You're pretty excited about this one as well, as obscure as it is.
Yes, I am. And it's really exciting to get such a topic that's quite broad, like, seduction, sex appeal, and think, right, where do I start? And so it's been a very interesting few weeks of research for this and some of our other episodes that are coming, not to spoil too much. And I'm very excited, very excited.
Yeah, it's cool because I think one thing that we're kind of asked, and I'm sure you are as well, it was how we kind of think of the episodes that we do, because our sort of premise is folklore and history, but within that we try and also go slightly broader, or how these things overlap in life anyway. And I know, I mean, some of them we think of kind of in the car or something, you think that could be a really good idea, or there's a spin-off from something else. But maybe tell our delightful listeners a little bit more about the kind of because we're going to sort of start looking at maybe doing episodes in threes, aren't we, with kind of if the theme works. So spill the beans as much or as little as you want on the three that are sort of forthcoming, because I think it's rather exciting and I think it's something for our listeners to look forward to as well.
So I was going to say before you said as much or as little is how many beans do you want, Alex?
Surprise me, because you always hit the mark, so surprise me.
So our next few episodes, next 3 episodes, are going to be really focused on an area of history that we're both very influenced by, we're both very interested in. And I think that's the relationship that a lot of people will have with this period of history, and that's the Victorian period. And it's also a period of history that has massively influenced Shropshire, Britain, and further afield. So we're going to be looking at the Victorians, but through the lens of some, well, for starters, one of our episodes is going to be on murder. We're not, just drop that in there. We're not going to be doing it in the sensationalist kind of way of, like, murder, but it's more looking at the phenomenon of murder in the not medieval, that's a different era, that's later in the episode. Not I do know my chronology. We're going to be looking at the phenomenon of murder in the Victorian period and how it was almost become folkloric in itself, especially with the way the newspapers and the tabloids played into that phenomenon. It's not to say that there were particularly more murders in the Victorian period than now or in previous centuries, but it was really the first time I think that it was reported to such an extent. So we're going to be looking at some of that, and there's going to be some local Shropshire cases and some from further afield. But obviously with murder there comes death. So we have turned to death in previous episodes, but we are going to be sojourning back into the realm of death with some of the things. And yeah, so we're going to be, I think that's enough for now, is that it's a very...
the whistle, murder and death, and if that doesn't tempt you, nothing will. Look at us.
Look at us.
To you about sex appeal, okay? So hold on to bonnets.
Sex and death, that's all
death,
literature, isn't it? No, so that's what we're going to really be looking at in the next few episodes. We're going to be looking at folklore, history, and that beautiful space where history and folklore entwine that creates something that's not really either. So there's going to be 3 episodes in the Victorian period, very heavily in the Victorian period. And stay tuned. I hope you'll enjoy them as much as you'll enjoy our inevitable penis jokes from this episode.
Oh, yes, never too tenuous, as I say pretty much in every episode. I also think we have got a little bit of news, which is rather exciting, which I'm going to sort of tell the first bit and then Amy's going to tell the rest, because Amy deliberated this news to me, which was that we received a rather exciting email the other day to do with an award. But Amy, you take it, because we're very excited about this.
Yes, so the Shropshire Witches podcast, that's us, if you hadn't already realised.
It is. Welcome.
Hello. Actually eligible for, and it's currently in the process where you can vote for us for the Listener's Choice Award in the British Podcast Awards, which is insane, is absolutely nuts that we could be
even mad.
considered or that people even know we exist. So thank you for those of you who continue to listen, and not to be cheeky, but if you so choose to maybe log on to the British Podcast Awards website and cast us a little vote, it would mean the absolute world to us. But
it would be everything to us. Yeah,
even just to have this in our first year is an absolutely incredible thing. But we'll keep everyone posted, and if we happen to be taking a little trip down to London to accept an award at some point, that would be phenomenal. I'm scared of London. I am a bit scared of London.
Fine. I mean, if we won, that would be we'd be over.
But even just finding out, so when we found out, it was about 10:30 at night, which for me is bedtime. It's about 2 hours past bedtime by my standards at this time in the term. So it was it's just amazing. But Listener's Choice Award, if you want to vote for the Shropshire Witches podcast, look for the British Podcast Awards online.
And we will love you, because honestly, we've got to say as well, the other bit to say thank you is that the amount of you that listen and download each month is into the thousands now, which is insane. So thank you, the love and the support, and for TikTok videos and all these things. You're all just really kind. We're kind of getting thousands of followers, and it's just sort of a bit mad. So we're really grateful, because we haven't even been going for a year yet. So your love and your weirdness is why we can keep doing this. So thank you so much. Just bear with me, folks, because what I'm going to do is see if there's a literal. So here we go. So the dictionary: sex appeal refers to the quality of being sexually attractive or the ability to, as if we didn't know this with the whole episode. Staggering. So I thought it was something else. I thought it was a history of merry-go-rounds. It's a quality of being sexually attractive or the ability to excite people sexually. I didn't really think of it like that. I didn't think like, hold on. It encompasses physical attractiveness and the ability to arouse interest or desire in others. It can be expressed through appearance, style, or charm. I think rather than looking at stonking hard-ons, we're going more down the charisma route tonight. So it's not going to be like a porno, but yeah. So that's the definition. Amy, you're going to deep dive for the first run for us. Let's go and let's see where the night takes us.
Yeah, so I like the pun night, because I'm delving straight into the medieval period.
Oi, oi.
Because there was lots of top places I thought about starting with. But certainly there is enough in kind of the classical world that you could talk about. But for me, what typifies kind of seduction and all the lovely stuff around that is a lot of things within the medieval world. Now, it's important to note that in the medieval world, it was very influenced by the Bible and biblical ideas, particularly ideas found in kind of Genesis and the creation narrative. The idea of Adam and Eve being the first man and woman, and the idea of the story of the fall. Original sin being all to blamed by women, and that women are the seductresses and men are the seduced.
Well, Salome, Mary Magdalene, Judith, Holofernes or Holofernes, however you want to say it. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that, but yeah, there's pages of the femme fatale written by men that no doubt were probably celibate and desperately needed a wank if they weren't already. But anyway, it's giving blow, isn't it, from the Hunchback of Notre Dame? You're like, mate, just wank, and then you wouldn't have to burn Esmeralda.
And it's amazing to think how influenced the idea of seduction has been by this biblical idea. This, it's not even a massively big part of the Bible. The idea of the Bible's massive. That's my professional opinion as an RE
teacher. So the Bible's massive, yeah.
Yeah, it's big. It's a big book, the Bible.
Yeah.
And you've got this relatively small, obscure idea of the woman being the orchestrator of sin and the original sin, and that perforates through history even to today. It's the woman that does the seducing, and these men are led astray by women, and that was very much a narrative within the medieval period. There was lots of ideas about how women were so sexually promiscuous, and rather interestingly, there was an idea that women actually needed sex more than men did in some points of the medieval period because of their wandering wombs and all that kind of thing. And
it's very Malleus Maleficarum.
Yeah.
Wombs.
So without sex. And there's a whole narrative within the medieval period as well about whether or not the Virgin Mary would have orgasmed, because in medieval understanding, a woman needed to orgasm in order to procreate, and sex was the main reason for procreation. It was the only reason you'd really do it, supposedly. So in order for
God now. We've
so in,
moved on.
yeah. So in order for Mary to conceive, she must have, and there was these tracts and loads of things written just on the idea of the Virgin Mary, which, you know, even a couple of hundred years later would have seen as virtually blasphemous to have these kind of discussions. So it's very important to emphasize that medieval people had a very different attitude to sex than probably you'd stereotypically imagine.
Yeah.
And they loved sex jokes. They loved, as you will see, and things like Chaucer are a testament to it, that sex was very, very much in the medieval mind, and and seduction and relationships between individuals were a real focus. And there was several ways that this was enacted, but we're going to look at two threads today because I think they're possibly some of the most interesting. And the first one is through love magic and the kind of enacting of spells using herbalism and stuff, and then the next one is courtly love. So we're going to start with love magic, and there are a number of kind of tracts and things that were written down that prescribe to this kind of practice. You've got things from the 12th century that were written saying how you could make a potion from things in nature, and it make people fall in love almost instantaneously. You've got people like Elizabeth Woodville, the White Queen, being accused of using love magic. I don't know what wood magic is.
It was wood magic, guys. Yeah.
Yeah. And Blanche of Navarre as well. She was another one that was accused, as we looked at in a previous episode.
Yeah.
But there was an imagined kind of moral panic about love magic, but it was very much a practice and a feature of everyday life. So it was something that women and conceivably men, but it was more of a female practice, would have been doing as part of their life. And there were some things, I want to go through some quite common ingredients for these this herbalism, and ingredients that were said to help one person fall in love with another, and they're found throughout different medieval sources. So the first one is mandrake root. And we have a number of references from the medieval period and beyond of mandrake root being used for love, for aphrodisiacs. In fact, it goes far back as actually biblical times being referred to as an aphrodisiac. And it was very, very popular. Now, they're the plants that supposedly look like men and women. There's meant to be the male plant looks like a human man, and a female plant looks like a human female.
Yeah.
And apparently when you pull them up, they're meant to screech as you pull them up.
Yeah.
And they, when used correctly in magical practice, were able to induce such a profound love and longing towards the person, the object of your desire. But the problem was with mandrake root was it was said folklorically to basically cause madness or death when you pulled it up. So at best, you might,
not worth it.
No, it isn't, is it? But at best, you might be able to, pull and get that person you think is proper fit. But in the worst, you're going to die or go mad.
So you'll go insane and die. So it's like, oh God, he's such a hottie. Or also, it's going to happen. They go, oh, it's Oliver Reed. And I'm like, oh, I could have told you that. He's dead. And then you go mad and die yourself. You're like, oh, and as he's waiting for me on the other side, what was the point in that?
Yeah. And it could also be worn as a fertility amulet as well. So you could wear it rather than use it in, medicines and stuff.
How widely known was it that it sent you mad and you were going to die? Because if that was widely known and you were wearing it, would that not be the ultimate cock block? Would they not be like, oh, you'd be like, you're the life. Yeah, but it's just like, I see the mandrake, babe, and I sort of know what's going to happen, and it's just giving Jane Eyre. Like, it's, I
love that. The idea that, you've successfully not gone mad, you're wearing it, and a bloke sees it and runs a mile because he's like, oh, she's insane.
Yeah, I know what's coming. You're like, well. At least you got to see him, huh?
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on. You're being serious.
No, yes, we're very serious historians.
We are. Yeah.
We are. So I'm going to tell you next about human remains and how human remains were used.
Sorry, I'm being silly. Sorry, it's because you said that so earnestly. You're like, we are. So human remains. Yes, but honestly, it's the right place. You're you're amongst friends. Continue.
Yes. So apparently there was some reference. Now, the thing is, with some of these, we don't know how much they were actually used, but we know they were written down. So we know with human remains, and certainly when you get even into like the 1700s, there is forms of magic being used with human remains. You've got the even the medicine craze where there was bits of mummies being used in the 1800s and stuff. So there is a precedence in the world for using human remains, but it was mainly powdered bone, pubic hair, and menstrual blood, which was apparently be able to grab your loved one. One known spell required specifically the bone marrow and spleen of a murdered boy.
So you know who, like, you know when you, sorry, I just keep jumping, but you know when you watch these, like every so often the algorithm sends you things on TikTok or Instagram, whatever. There are people now, like wellness people, I don't know if it's still called wellness, I'm probably out of date, but you know, they do these insane skincare routines. I reckon if you said that, people thought it gave them like, you know, fewer lines or an extra 10 years, they would drink it or apply it. Like we're laughing now because we're like pubic hair and a bone and blood of a murdered whatever. There's still people out there that would do that when they're like bone broth and you're like, mate, it's stock, like just chill.
Yeah.
You spend 40 quid on bone broth, it's stock. There's people that would do that
100%. Yeah, and that just emphasizes the fact that we're no different to the people of the past. We're just inspired by different trends and things. But there's definitely written things down with the use of human remains. Menstrual blood, historians believe that's linked to the idea that love magic was gendered, and it was a very gendered practice, being mainly women using it. And a lot of the time it was used by even women who were married as a means of trying to gain their husband's affection. And love magic
That'll do it.
Get some menstrual blood and, you know, the spleen of a murdered boy.
Like they like the smell of like santal, whatever, like, you know, Le Labo, you're like, no, period on your face. That'll like foolproof. All the while it was free and we were buying perfume, you know, God.
Yeah, just get that.
Just give that on the face, you're fine.
And I wanted one more that I am fascinated by the idea of, probably because it's slightly blasphemous, but it's the idea of the power of the consecrated host. Okay. So the consecrated host is used within the communion, and it's the bread and that's used. And this was supposedly in certain parts of the medieval period a vital element in magic, including love spells. So it could be used in other means, it could be used in other types of spells, but it was very prominent in certain love potions and spells. And what's so interesting about this is that it would have been very difficult to actually get the consecrated host. Yeah. So it's not like you could just pop to Tesco and go, I'll have a bag of
consecrated host.
Communion bread, please. Thanks, mate. Because it would need for it to actually be consecrated in order for you to use it. So it would have meant very inventive ways that you grabbed and got it. So even things like hiding it under your tongue after it had been fed to you by the priest, and then kind of taking it out, hiding it, and then using it for your spells later. But it was usually involved having this consecrated host, the part of the communion, writing your incantations on it, and then words as well that were linked to what you actually wanted. So I think that's fascinating because it shows how, particularly because the medieval period was really, particularly when you get to the later medieval, was setting the precedents for things like the witch trials. So if you've got this idea that these women were stealing holy communion bread and these sacred rituals and using them for a perversion of it, conceivably you can understand how the mythology around the Black Mass and the witches' sabbats and things like that developed when you get into like the 1500s and the 1600s. So it is. And then there's lots of things that you would expect as well. So things like honey, it's sweet. You want the potential partner to be sweet on you. You've got things like roses as well. Roses are universally seen as seductive and symbolic of love. Rose water was used in a lot of medicine. So there's a lot of things you would expect, but also there's things like beetles' wings, animal remains, and worms as well. So not sure how vegan some of these potions are.
Than others.
not too sure. But so that is one way, if you are a woman, you could try and be seductive in the medieval period. Now we know that all medieval women look like spoons. I think that's one thing I've pushed forward. So maybe you're not the most attractive spoon out there. You could use magic in order to try and bring forth your lover. Let's turn to courtly love now.
Yeah.
Because courtly love, I think, typifies what many people see as the medieval mindset of love and seduction and all the love games and things like that. And it really does stem in part from the fact that the majority of particularly upper class, the sort of marriages that would be partaking in courtly love, the majority of them were actually arranged marriages. So certainly there were arranged marriages that had love and that could, partners that did really love and cherish each other, but also there was a lot of marriages of convenience or for power and things like that.
And inconvenience, but yeah.
And very much inconvenience, some of them. So I think certainly that's one of the reasons that courtly love developed. And there's lots of other suggestions about where it came from as well. So there's for instance the idea that it developed out of kind of really it's in from about the 12th century. And you've got the troubadours, so the poet musicians from southern France. They really popularized it because they composed songs and poetry as well that praised kind of the virtues of a noble and chaste love, and it was directed usually towards a married or unattainable lady. And so much of courtly love is linked to women that these men feel they can't have. And this is where the gendered aspect
that hasn't changed though. We can romanticize that with the troubadours as much as we like, but that's just hard.
It's just in early 2000s indie, isn't it?
I was going to say the chase is still alive and well.
And it's so there's some people will say it's the troubadours that really brought it forward, but also I think what's quite interesting is that courtly love developed around about the same time as the kind of Crusades and the cultural exchange between the very, very European world and the Islamic world came about. Arabic poetry, I think, and I've read several historians that advocate for this, really influenced the idea of courtly love, particularly kind of the Persian poets and the kind of the school of Rumi and things like that, because it really emphasizes the concept of longing and passionate forbidden love, which then is translated into the courts of Europe. And honestly, if you listeners have any spare time and you're interested, I would definitely, if you haven't already read things like Rumi, because he is fascinating. His poetry is some of the most, imagine Gomez Adams in the medieval world, because it is, and a lot of the Arabic writers and Persian poets at this time really have this undercurrent of really deep longing and desire throughout their poetry. So there is an idea that these poems and this kind of cultural exchange influence courtly love. And then there's other things as well that it can be traced to kind of classical literature and a throwback to that. But the main ideas of courtly love are characterized by the idealization of the beloved. So you've got to not just love them, you've got to put them on a pedestal, which is definitely healthy. Definitely something definitely you should do. They're not just beautiful, they're the epitome of beauty, they're virtuous, they're graceful. It's an idealization of the beloved rather than a reality of them. It's also, as I said, I think I mentioned, is it's very gendered but in the opposite way to love magic. So often in courtly love, it is the men doing all the chasing, the men lusting after these unattainable women, rather than in love magic it was usually the women lusting after the unattainable men. You've also got a lot of like love triangles, which we still love to this day. You only have to look at Emmerdale or EastEnders, don't you?
Menage a trois.
You've got adoration and devotion, and also secrets, and there's all these codes of conduct and strict rules of etiquette, sending messages through poetry and courtly rituals. And also there's an element of platonic love. Well,
The humble dick pic. Yeah.
just drawn on a scroll somewhere. And
Or into your WhatsApp unsolicited. Thank you.
and I think what's interesting as well is there's such a, within kind of medieval religion, there's such a focus on marriage and the institution of marriage,
Yeah.
which wasn't always the case. There was, we have references of extramarital affairs and people that were still engaging in sex outside of marriage. But within courtly love and the traditions of courtly love, there's very much the idea that love cannot be confined by the boundaries of marriage. Just because that woman is married, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't lust after her.
Yeah.
There's also that idea of jealousy, that jealousy is one of the most intense, powerful and persisting emotions, and that if you do not feel jealousy, you do not love, which again, totally healthy, totally recommend being like that.
Yeah. God, that sounds like sage advice. Yeah.
And there's lots of references of courtly love, because courtly love entered the courts, as I said, around the time of the Crusades, like going into the middle of the medieval period. But we've got lots of references bleeding into literature, and a lot of Arthurian legends actually also demonstrate courtly love.
Yeah.
So King Arthur, as we've all probably heard of him, he's eponymous, isn't he? King Arthur.
No, I'd have thought so. Yeah.
If you haven't, a quick Google search.
Check yourself.
And there's some debates whether or not he existed. I don't need to get into those. But certainly his literature was very influential in the medieval period. And he was meant to be the noblest of kind of warriors, of kings, and he had his round table. And several of the stories that actually are very linked to the idea of courtly love, not Courtney love.
Courtney love.
It's the first time I've done that, but I've been
all together
fighting that for a while. And we're told very early on in the kind of King Arthur mythos that he was married to a very beautiful woman called Guinevere.
Yeah.
She is a very shadowy figure throughout all of it. We don't really ever learn much about her.
Yeah.
But in some of the earliest versions, she's a prize won by a warrior king. Nice. Others, she's kind of a Roman lady. She's kind and loving but jealous, quarrelsome and inconsistent.
Well, she is. That's what they. Yeah.
The first ever reference to her in Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain, she's actually been the first reference to her, or one of the first references. She's being unfaithful, and she's cheating. Yeah, she's cheating on Arthur with his nephew Mordred. And we get a development with her coming in about the 1170s, and in the Arthurian legends around them, you are introduced to the affair between Queen Guinevere and Lancelot.
Yeah.
And this is where Lancelot is an absolute dick, because he is meant to be Arthur's closest and most loyal knight, but he's, spending a bit too much time with his wife on the side.
Yeah. But she'll get the blame, and I think that's what matters here.
It's all her fault. How dare she, have a wandering womb and need.
Yeah, no, how it can be. Yeah,
yeah, and it's in this story between Lancelot and Guinevere almost becomes, particularly in the medieval period, as enduring as the Arthurian legends in themselves. So, in The Death of Arthur by Malory, the affair is unproblematic, but it's still a secret. But some of the knights begin to suspect what's happening, begin to suspect they're having the affair, and they report the concerns to King Arthur. And then, because technically, well, no, he is, it's not a technicality, but because Arthur is king, Guinevere's actions are treasonous. So she's actually committing treason through her infidelity.
Yeah.
And the way that her infidelity is depicted, there is a lot of the same kind of behaviors you see in courtly love. It's all games and flirtation and gifts and things like that, very typical to what would have been played out in the courts that were sharing these stories. So in the actual Mallory account, Arthur doesn't want to punish the lovers, but he knows he has to. He finds them in bed together. Various knights break down the door. Lancelot escapes, but just as you said, Guinevere is blamed. She's arrested and she's condemned to the death of being burnt at the stake.
Yeah. Well, clearly, according to this, you've only yourself to blame.
But Lancelot, being Lancelot, comes just in time, swoops in, throws her over his horse, and charges her to safety.
Yeah.
So the narrative goes on, but that's a really good example of this extramarital seduction that it has a lot of the same marks as a courtly love, and it was used to really demonstrate courtly love. And what's interesting in some of the other love stories or versions of the Lancelot and Guinevere love story is that there's actually a real lack of criticism that's directed at Lancelot or Guinevere. It's almost the idea that this kind of illicit love was going to happen because she was so noble. And this love triangle, though it's tragic in some of the narratives, actually was an inevitability because of the behaviours of the court. And certainly I think it was used, a lot of the Arthurian legends were used as very indicative of the behaviours of the court. And I think that all comes into play through some of the later things that were written, like the actual manuals and the sets of rules that were written down to kind of guide young men on how to achieve this courtly love and this unattainable love. So it's really fascinating to have this duality between the idea of love being chaste and between one man and one woman and the sanctity of marriage, whilst also having these intricate games being played within the court.
It's by definition, isn't it? It's the timely excuse. So hence it was so popular in the Tudor court when they sort of replicated the chivalry of old, which actually never really existed anyway. And then the Victorians fell in love with it again because it really just gave you an excuse to have a mistress and to bang him if you wanted. So like romantic is these lovers that are kept apart. You're like, all right, Charles Dickens, maybe you should stop ghosting your wife and kids and go back to them. But, it's that old adage, isn't it, of the sort of the femme fatale who doesn't really exist, or, some woman who's to blame, or lovers that are kept apart. And, call me an old cynic, which I'm sure I am, but I do find some of those tropes quite tiresome. And even I watch them in rom-coms, I think, oh, for God's sake, these sort of starry-eyed lovers that are kept apart. And I think, what about the life you've made? What about the family? What about, those that is not to blame for any of this? Why don't you just get a grip and put your cock back in your pants? The grass is not greener. Just calm down, go home, toss one off and just get a grip, frankly. But it's, that kind of idea. And I suppose, that's it. That's the Tudors, particularly. Henry VIII was obsessed. And, he's a real poster boy for that because he had 6 wives. So it's like, listening, guys, this idea of, and, because he did it to, Anne of Cleves, didn't he? He went there, turned up dressed as sort of Robin Hood or something of that essence.
Oh, did he?
She'll recognize her true love. She won't need to know it's me. And she just thought some sort of unpleasant looking older bloke had burst into her rooms, and she was like, oh my God. And then he was mortified that she didn't recognize him. And there was quite a big fallout after that. But it's this idea, isn't it? And in terms of the realms of sex appeal, I don't find that remotely attractive, but I think some people still find this idea of, or endlessly pursue this sort of intense, feverish love where they really belong with someone. And you're like, oh, for God, be friends. Like, do you know what I mean? Have things in common, have common ground. Like, it hasn't got to be like Arthur and Guinevere and Lancelot, because that was a shit show anyway.
Yeah.
Just, and it's even in the kind of the modern day with the sort of the exhibitionism on Instagram of like, couples sort of linking hands in a heart and things like this. And you're like, I'm sorry, I'm just going to, take my eyes out.
It feels almost very GCSE drama, very teenage,
doesn't it?
star-crossed lovers.
Sex, yeah.
I think it's very. I think what's interesting about the medieval period is the duality of ideas. You've got the church regulating sex. You've got the church saying even what positions people could have sex in. But then everyone in the medieval period was sex mad.
Well, of course it will, because if there's an embargo on it, If you've got, Thomas Aquinas, hey,
My main
someone,
man.
yeah, he's back. If you've got someone telling you not to do it, or that sex is bad, you should really only do it for procreation, you're gonna have a lot of kids. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's if something is enjoyable and it comes naturally to people, and then suddenly they're like, you must only do this, but in this position, they're like, we're gonna make this work. It's humankind's proclivity for things that they should or shouldn't do is endless. And also, we're always going to find penises and things funny. I think the kind of the comprehensive view is what is it that's actually appealing in people? Do you know what I mean? So what is it that we kind of find ourselves drawn to? It's interesting because I suppose without going into the realms of beauty standards. I mean, in terms of the medieval age and things like that, I'm looking at obscure crushes. Give me Richard Neville any day, the Kingmaker, based almost solely on the waxwork at Warwick Castle. Because like, damn, I remember seeing that even from a younger age, just going in and thinking, damn, is that what the Kingmaker looked like? They don't know. The portraits probably aren't a fair representation. But honestly, some of those, I'm like, the Kingmaker, yeah, he's giving medieval, but like in all the best ways. And when he was played by James Frayne in the White Queen, as you mentioned earlier, and if you don't know that actor, look him up, he's hot. It's interesting, this idea of, I know, look, a waxwork, can it be hot? Turns out it can, but these people that can be appealing because they're rebellious and sycophantic and all these things, they're interesting. I think it's like Robin Hood, isn't it? If we're going to look at the original medieval pin-up, Robin Hood, babe. And it's the fact that probably most likely the story's French. It altered hugely with the Reformation. And really what was going down in the earlier and mid-medieval time was considered sexy, was his devotion to the Virgin Mary. Whereas can you imagine if you thought Robin Hood was hot now and he's like, oh yeah, I'm bang mad about the Virgin Mary, you'd be like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like,
can you imagine
not like so well now, is it?
Alex, I'm dating someone. Oh, who are you dating? Well, there's this bloke and he's an outlaw. Oh, that's a bit rebellious. Yeah, he's really dedicated to the Virgin Mary. He loves her. He absolutely loves the Virgin Mary. What do you do with that?
Like, yeah, exactly. And the other thing is, like, it's like somebody's clearly in love with their ex. If he's in love with the Virgin Mary, you are playing second fiddle. Like, you cannot compete with the Virgin Mary, and she is everywhere. Like, you can't. That's it. You can't, like, go, get out. That one is a red flag. That is a walking red flag. I think it's funny whether, I suppose it's a mix of all things, isn't it? Because sex appeal belongs to every age. So when you're in a more non-secular age, then a devotion to the Virgin Mary is probably like ding ding. But look at and Robin Hood, because elusive, doesn't really exist, and the fact when he's looking maybe something like the Green Man, the fact that when you had pre-Reformation him belonging to the forest or a more kind of pagan story, medieval, it wasn't absurd that he lived in the forest. But you start to get rid of Catholicism and devotion to the Virgin Mary, and you've got to introduce Marian, and you've got to explain why he lives in a forest, because it doesn't really wash anymore. So the story develops as our kind of what we find appealing and attractive changes. But ultimately, it's interesting that the core of the story is the same. This chap living on the periphery of law, which we find, look at James Norton in Happy Valley. He was literally kicking the shit out of people and running people over with a car, men and women alike. And we were like, yeah, he is hot though. Is he just misunderstood? Yeah, and you're like, no, he's just hot. He's not misunderstood. He's just hot. That's it. I know he's only a fictional character in that, but it's funny. Oliver Reed as Bill Sykes, you could do abhorrent, hideous things. We're like, yeah, do you see his eyes though? And what is it about this strange line that we sort of dance? Like, if you want to go, I'm talking about fancying a waxwork, but if you want to go into the obscure, Robin Hood the Fox, I'm going to find me a millennial that doesn't find Robin Hood the Fox just a little bit hot, because he is hot. I'm sorry, he is hot. And King John in that, not hot voice though. And you're like, do I fancy King John's voice? Probably. Some people have got Jessica Rabbit. We've got Robin Hood the Fox. Like, it's just trying to explain away what is it that's like, well, I suppose the whole premise of the episode is, what is sex appeal? What is it that historically, or that comes through to the modern day, that we find attractive? Because obviously beauty standards change. Obviously people are always going to like a nice face or good skin or whatever it may be. But within that, I think sex appeal is something completely different. I think it's far rarer, and I don't think it's as gratuitous as just like, oh, you can see a bit of cleavage or someone's whatever, or like, you know, these cod pieces, like
bring back cod pieces.
Back the cod piece. They hear they're knocking at the door. Well, they'd probably more bat around the door down, wouldn't they? But
yeah, they'd be around the corner, but the cod piece would be there.
Yeah, you bet the cod piece is here, but he's just parking the car. But I think, like, let's look, if we can, at this. What is this elusiveness of sex appeal? I want to know who's your. This feels like more of the free for all quarter, but who would you say, if we're going to look? Let's look at historical crushes, and we can move along like in eras. But I'm going to say, if you've got, and don't say Thomas Aquinas, you're not allowed to.
No, oh no. I'm weird, Alex, but I'm not that weird.
It's Thomas Aquinas, babe. It's always
just pops up everywhere. Like everywhere I turn, that man is there looking at me with his weird tonsure.
But that's the
judging me for being exactly the opposite of what he expects someone to be.
Exactly, and I'm saying the weird. It's a tonsure. He's allowed to have it, but it's not great.
He is. He's allowed. He was among them.
I was like, weird haircut. It's literally his religion, but I think it's the algorithm. We've talked about him at length, and we're like, if he thinks the lady does protest too much, girls, we're like, Thomas Aquinas, why does he keep appearing? It's like, because you two won't stop banging on about him. And he's just rapping at the window like, I'm here. Speak of the devil and he will appear. Speak of Aquinas and he will appear. Who is your kind of, and I love any listeners, like, you've got to tell us as well, who is your history? Give me a history pin-up that you would say is conventional and your weird one.
That's
I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah. That is really difficult. I think what's interesting about the way we look at certain historical figures, and this is me trying to fill in while I'm thinking, is how much fiction pops into it, how much these fictionalized ideas of certain people.
Yeah, Arthur and Robin Hood, case in point. Yeah.
Yeah, and how there's a certain character that people will lust over that's very dashing or very, you know, Dick Turpin type people, rather than it being, you know, someone who's like Ivan the Terrible or someone. I've never heard anyone, girls, if you're there, if you do exist, Ivan the Terrible fans, I've never heard anyone go, "For Ivan the Terrible was a bit."
They're not going to admit that.
No,
but mine's Ivan the Terrible. Why is that weird?
DM us if you. But is there certain people in history that I think are acceptable to lust over,
like
male and female, and then there's certain that you would just be laughed out of the room if you mentioned. And I am going to be completely honest, there's no one really in history I've ever looked at and gone, "For yeah, okay." I was only in 1372.
I thought you were going to give it as Canute, actually.
Well,
no. But of course it is.
My problem is, right, and this probably says a lot about me, there's certain people in history like Harold Hardrada or people like that I don't fancy, I kind of just want to be.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know, this is more weird lore. Amy wants to be a pirate and she wants to be Harold Hardrada. Yeah. So I don't, maybe it's just the way I am, but I don't look at certain people that other people would be like, "For yeah." I just think, well, I'd really like to be him. Imagine how cool it'd be to be Harold Hardrada. I'd be a Viking. That'd be cool.
Isn't that a massive part of sex appeal? Like,
yeah.
Because if you everybody has somebody that they find attractive, but you don't fancy them. Sex appeal is because surely part of you, like Guillaume le Conqueror, like, you know, William the Conqueror, I find him much sexier when you have his French name. And William the Conqueror was kind of sexy. He's probably a complete arsehole. In fact, he definitely was. And he was probably just like really insecure and just, I bet he was as cringe. Doesn't matter. Guillaume. Oh.
I reckon I could fight him. I do reckon. I don't think I could fight the other two, but I do think William the Conqueror I could fight.
Yeah, I definitely feel like
fight him.
Yeah, he's like, He's the main guy from the Norman
It's
Conqueror.
like,
So like, yeah, I'd fight him.
I fight him.
Oh yeah,
It's
what?
like
I
with
feel like I'd fight Bill Sykes. Unlikely. Yeah.
it's like with Gomez Adams. Every woman about my age and your age that I've ever met that is goth inclined has been like, oh, I'd love to be, where's my Gomez? I want to be him. I want to be Gomez Adams. I want to fence people and call everyone my boy and chap. But I can understand why women lust after him, because he's that idealized idea of a husband and a lover and that kind of thing. But I do just kind of want to be him.
But if you break down that level of like, as Morticia, that level of like sexual,
yeah, it's insane.
Distance would be gross. You'd be like, can you not just snog my arm every time you see me? I'd be like, get off! I've got things to do. The dogs need walking.
I'm busy.
That's the thing, because like, so my sister always really fancied Gomez. I thought I got it, but like I was all about Oliver Reed as Bill Sykes. That was like, he literally stoved Nancy's head, and you're like, yeah, but when he opens that letterbox in his eyes, do you know what I mean? You're like, just girl, you got to take what you got to take. But I just find him, that is a dish. And I think, this idea that you sort of approached of wanting to be them, I think that's the power of sex appeal over just finding somebody attractive. We did an episode on beauty standards, but what is it that, like Kate Moss, gorgeous, but so many people, she seems relatable, even though of course she isn't. She's a millionaire. She's a hugely famous supermodel, but there is something about her that everybody relates to. And she's, for somebody who's such a type, everybody fancies her. It's bizarre. Like, and you can see why, because she's beautiful. But, sometimes you can say, like Eva Green, somebody's very beautiful and overtly beautiful, but isn't everybody's type, but they can see she's beautiful. I think everybody fancies Kate Moss, and so it goes beyond her beauty to her charisma, to her sex appeal. And she's sort of quite quietly spoken, I think, in interviews, but she's really just got, I hate it when people say it, but she's got it. Whatever it is, it's not, can you define it? But she's got it, hasn't she? She's got
so
that kind of,
discussion about what that it is, and I think
nobody knows.
The thing.
That's
what is
why.
it? What's that it?
You can't quantify it, but that's why you can have. So like I say, if you don't expect to go to Warwick Castle and fancy a waxwork. I mean, obviously, I wasn't like thinking, oh my God, look, take his photo, but you went past and thought, God, sorry, is that waxwork?
Listeners, she has a photo album on her phone with 537 pictures of that waxwork.
36.
36. You deleted one.
You deleted one since I was last there. Listener caution. There are there's just, I don't know. There's just certain people where even their name, like William the Conqueror, you're like, God, guy's a badass. It's a really cringy name. But like, you're still like, say what you see. William the Conqueror.
Not Ivan the Terrible, is it? That's
what is. Peter the Great. He was a twat. But of course he was. Peter the Great, clues in the name. He's a knob. But I do, I think for me, one of I always thought was a more obscure historic crush, but I think is relatable, is a historic character played by a modern actor. But I saw a video on I'm so old, on Instagram this morning, a reel or whatever the kids call them. But it's very funny. A chap probably about my age is reviewing The Secret Garden, and it's very funny. And he says that Dickon was a stud, which he was. Not now, because he's about 12, but when I was about 9, Dickon was a stud. He knew about birds. He could talk to the crows. He used the word wick. You were like, oh, guy was hot. And she goes to her uncle, and you just get things like Colin Craven going, I'm going to get a hump on my back like my father. And you're like, okay. But then you meet his father, and you're like, Colin, you have done Lord Craven a disservice, because Lord Craven is what I would call smoking hot. Like, he's looking at the fire, and you're like, who dat? It's got a good head of hair. And then he's sort of just looking a bit gothic. You'd love it, by the way. Have you seen it, Amy? Surely.
Yeah, I have, many years ago.
He's a bit of you, isn't he, with the gothic? And he's just sitting there, and then he looks at her and goes, your eyes, because she looks just like his wife. But I tell you, if he turned around from by the fire, I'd be like, oh, awkward. You're really, oh, God.
Run away. No,
I wouldn't run away. I'd be like, widower, is it? Are you're in a deep depression or broken heart? Is it? Well, let me see what I can do. But this guy doing the review, it really made me laugh. He says, because obviously in the book, and it's not PC, but, you know, they were talking about him having, you know, a stoop and all the rest of it. And he said he's described as deformed. And they show John Lynch, the Irish actor, who is very good looking. And they say, and this man goes, in what way deformed? He said he's got a hunch. He said, I can make that work. I was like, yeah, me too. I remember watching that and thinking, why are they all afraid of Lord Craven? He's a fox. He lives in Misselthwaite Manor, which is insane. It's amazing. Maggie Smith's his housekeeper. Like, that's the goal. If someone could picture the perfect man for me, I'd be like John Lynch in Misselthwaite Manor with Maggie Smith as the housekeeper. Yes, please. And you've got little Dickon running around doing, I mean, not the best job of the garden, it's quite overgrown, but, you know, it's not bad.
Trying.
Yeah, I'd be like, get the stepson out of bed, there's nothing wrong with him, as they later establish. Let him live his life, bless him. But that, yeah, oof, Lord Craven, I think he was one of my first crushes. That was an awakening, was John Lynch looking up from the fire, sort of stooped over with a broken heart. And I was like, oh, okay, who's that? Who's that? Like that's Mary Lennox's uncle. Well, he's not related to me. I'd be straight in there. Also, I've got to say Nicholas Rowe, who's still a mega babe. I love that phrase. When he played, and I was younger, when he played young Sherlock Holmes. So basically, I think in essence, what we're learning here is that I like geeks. No, but when he played young Sherlock Holmes, and actually Nicholas Rowe now as well, but he's not always an obvious choice, but he's tall and quite aquiline featured, but he's hot. And I think his kind of clever bookishness, I don't know, but I would argue, because like Brad Pitt never appealed to me, ever. Nicholas Rowe, oh, yes. John Lynch, yes. Eric Cantona as well. Or is that a widely accepted one, Eric Cantona? He is smoking hot.
I don't know. I don't know. That's one, listeners.
You never fancied Eric Cantona?
I can't say I have. I can't say I have, but then again, I don't know. I don't.
It's obvious, and you're like, ooh.
Have I? Yeah, I know what he looks like. Yeah.
Google.
Yeah, I do. I do know what he looks like. Yeah.
Is anyone else listening to this and going, I feel like someone's going to be listening to this and going, yes, oh my God, yes. And someone else is going to listen going, no. Oh, Eric Cantona's Asian, I could find one. I'm going to argue Eric Cantona kind of 90s when he had his little football shirt on or whatever, like, yeah. And also, do you know when I really fancied Cantona was in that advert when he played, he was sort of acting like a French farmer in Marseille, or he's from Marseille, isn't he? But do you remember that advert?
Vaguely, yeah.
Beer or something. And they were all sitting in a pub and I was like, God. And it was Eric Cantona. And I was like, damn. Yeah, he was hot in that. But yeah, so sorry, over to you. I'm just listing people that...
No.
These are maybe people with a kind of, like a very evident sex appeal, I would argue. But what is that? I don't know.
That's the thing. It's looking at these things and looking and thinking, well, is it subjective? Yes, probably. But is the kind of that it that we've been discussing, is that it subjective to a certain extent, but is there something underlying that just makes it happen? You know, what is the science of sex appeal? And so much is dependent on the era, and is the science of seduction and the reasoning behind seduction different in 100 years ago to now? It all biologically comes to the same kind of thing, doesn't it? But what is it that makes that person be seen as a cultural kind of icon of sex? It's like little things, like you look at pictures of 1970s Tom Jones now, and
it's such a good example.
Yeah, a little bit.
Tom has got something about him now. Then it was a bit.
You look at pictures of 1917 Tom Jones, 1970s Tom Jones, and it's a little bit scary. It's the legs and the hairy and the kind of hair, but
the bulge as well, Amy. Those tracks, so they're preternaturally tight.
There is a really cool picture of him wearing a yellow tracksuit with 2 gold Rolexes on, and that he does look a bit like a geezer there. But
Google that.
In the 1970s, he was seen as being this like pinnacle of sex appeal, and you know, I think I'm still a little bit scarred by Sex Bomb. That song should never have been made.
That was quite late into his, and he's still going strong. But that was
love the man.
That was that. Yeah,
absolutely love the man. But why is what was considered the pinnacle of sex appeal in the 70s, very different to
That
now.
Well, it's, the thing is, and I'd be interested what you think about this. So, that I love a silver fox, and I think, if they're aging like a fine wine, Liam Neeson, case in point. But, if you look at, so when you're young, maybe, and you're watching something, I don't know, Pride and Prejudice, whatever. And I mean, the 90s one, Mark Darcy, not Mark Darcy, that's a Bridget Jones character. What's his name? Oh God, what's Mark Darcy's name? Real Colin Firth.
Yes.
Some people love him and coming out of the thing in the wet shirt, and it didn't really work for me. But in the other one with Keira Knightley, that very handsome man who's married to Keely Hawes, played Darcy. And when you're young, you're like, oh, sweet. But as you get older, you realise that Donald Sutherland as the dad, you're like, damn, Donald, who dead? So does your appreciation for sex appeal become more like recognized as you get older? Because sometimes you look back, you fancied like Westlife and you're like, God, there wasn't a charismatic one in that band. But as you get older, you're like, oh, Donald Sutherland, yes, that man is a fine wine. So it's interesting. I think as you get older, you recognize probably the worth of sex appeal, the worth of charisma, of intelligence, of, I mean, there are historians that would not pass the bar of conventionally handsome. Are they stone cold foxes? Absolutely. Absolutely. Is it the power of intelligence? I don't know. I'm interested, and I feel like we've slightly taken our listeners on a false route here, because we're like, what is the history of sex appeal? It's like, we don't know the answer because nobody.
Yeah, we don't. No.
I'm just going to say he's hot. He's a waxwork, and the uncle from the Secret Garden. But when you look at somebody like, okay, so Edward VII is a really good example. Dirty Bertie, and that's quite a badge.
It is, yeah. He definitely earned it.
Oh, yeah. But his siege de mort, his sex chair, I mean, the guy's a walking red flag.
Yeah.
The rest of the things he got up to in Ireland and the Curragh Wrens and things wasn't enough. He's like, got a sex chair. You're like, have you? Good. Is that the time? But well, gotta go. But what I love is the siege de mort is designed for not one but two women. You're like, two. And it's so he could support himself, but also whilst I don't know with one and what he's doing to t'other. But use your imagination or don't, depending on whether you want to keep your supper down. But it was not conventionally handsome. He had those sort of slightly Hanoverian, I would say. The eyes, it's a look, isn't it? Queen Victoria had them. I don't know if bulging sounds a bit harsh, the eyes, but they were pretty. There was a little bit of Cavalier King Charles about the eyes, I think. But he wasn't a looker, but such was his wealth, of course. But equally, a lot of the sources and things, they were saying, speaking of his charisma, that he was funny, that he was good fun. And, is this because he's the jolly monarch at the tail end of Queen Victoria becoming something of a paperweight by the end? In her early days, and she was something diddy, like about 4'9" or something. But they were speaking of her lovely skin and all this kind of thing. And, it's interesting how she, by the end, they were like, oh, she was like this, she let herself go, she was miserable. He was not what you would call conventionally handsome. And everyone's like, the jolly monarch. And you're like, well, yeah, he sort of let himself go as well, hadn't he? It's just that he'd got a chair to prop himself up so he could bang all these women. And he was sleeping with his friends' wives and things. And they're like, oh, Bertie, classic Bertie. And you're like, is it classic? And it's just interesting. And the other example, of course, to me that seems demonstrable is Diana Mitford, who was staggeringly beautiful and from the much known and celebrated to a degree Mitford sisters. She was married to Oswald Mosley, and that to me says all you need to know.
Yeah,
like the society beauty that is Diana Mitford. And there's not like, do you need to read on?
I really like the picture of Oswald Mosley getting punched. I'm just going to put that out there.
I think good. I think that's a fair
fan of it.
Like, yeah,
big fan of it.
I just think it's like, what's the level of hotness if your Tinder profile is society beauty and unabashed fascist? I'd be like, oh, first bit is a bit cringy, but I like the bit. Society beauty sounds like you're a bit of a twat. Unabashed fascist. You're like, no. Yeah, but I am Diana Mitford. Yeah, no, you're hot, Diana. I get it, but you're an unabashed fascist. Yeah, I am. My husband's like Mosley. Good. So glad that we're still celebrating you.
It's like the young Stalin, though. The amount of women I've come across, like even when I was at like university, that would see a picture of young Stalin and they'd be like, "Oh, but he's really hot," and you're like, "But he's Stalin." He is Stalin, and they're like, "Yeah, but look at his eyes," and you're like, "But he's Joseph Stalin, the Stalin."
He did, do you know what I mean? And I think it's he had that thick hair and the kind of, I'm not going down that road, don't worry. But like, I'm going to argue Lenin never quite had the same.
No, or Trotsky.
Same presence.
Mind you, though, Trotsky
the best. No, I'm sorry. Trotsky cannot be your obscure.
No, it isn't. But Trotsky had it, because the amount of women he was able to charm into bed.
You know what? Trotsky looks like he likes pistachio milk. That's all I'm going to say. Trotsky looks like he drinks in a very trendy coffee house.
He does. I like pistachio milk, but I don't drink in trendy coffee houses.
Sorry. You and Trotsky share that in common. Hopefully you won't pass in the same way.
I won't. Hopefully not. Hopefully not. But he had an affair with, I think it was Churchill's niece.
Wouldn't surprise me.
It was some relation of Churchill, but Trotsky was he was a seductive man, more so than the others. But there is that idea that there's certain people that it's that I can change him, isn't it? With some women,
society women thought this sort of political thing was a kind of, bit of a game, isn't it? Fun. It's like, oh, I've banged Trotsky, who you've banged. I'm married to Oswald Mosley. Oh, lovely, different eras, but still. Yeah. But like, the other one, of course, is a classic, is Che Guevara. You're like, oh, damn. And you always feel like it's a bit controversial to fancy these people, but you're like, I think kind of hotness and politics shouldn't really go together, but of course they do. Because, of course, we always do it the same with, it's pretty slim pickings. I was going to say the Houses of Parliament for us are not really, they're not breeding ground of hot men. And they get up to grotesque things. But, it's interesting what we kind of define as attractive. And, of course, that a lot of these men, get beautiful wives and beautiful, because look, Melania Trump, I'm just going to go there. Dreadful husband, probably not a great person. She can be married to Donald Trump. She is undeniably beautiful. I think that cannot be, what's his daughter called? I can't remember what his daughter called. She's very beautiful, but she's also Trump's daughter. So you're like, and she does seem kind of a little bit unsurprisingly out of touch, and says things that you think, good God.
Oh dear.
Oh my God. But it's just interesting, this idea of, is it his obscene wealth that's appealed to her? Who knows? We can't speak for her. I can't imagine it's his personality or his appearance. Both those things are absolutely abhorrent. But I don't know. I mean, look, we've got to do some effort before we kind of start winding down on what we think is the kind of, the history of sex appeal, because this idea of, like, in the kind of the Georgian era, it was all about the highwayman. And what if you got sort of like in the age of film, as we go from like the 20s, 30s, things like this, and also post-war, the types of things we find appealing. Maybe if you're looking at 50s and 60s, Sid James, how did Sid James get all those women? It's not even like he was tall. Tall is it's not always a modern fascination, but we do love tall men. Sid James was what?
He was a geezer though, wasn't he? But he was more of I just see granddad material.
Yeah.
Evidently a lot of women didn't, because he was very
well
regarded.
But it's the same, like, it's interesting because I totally get the Barbara Windsor thing. She just kind of had so much confidence and she seemed fun, everything. You're like, Babs, I don't know. I mean, maybe they just got on well, but it's fascinating to me. The people that are painted to be kind of maybe unappealing, i.e. Lord Craven, but actually turns around and you're like, I think they knew what they were doing, because they got him to turn around quite dramatically and you're like, oh, turns out you're beautiful. But I suppose they were looking at an un-PC time of beautiful, but as they would have perceived it, but it's interesting, those that, like I say, that just aren't and conventionally appealing, and yet we're sort of almost like fixated with them, like they've got us in a kind of a headlock in kind of terms of our fascination. But even like Georgian beauty, when you look at things like the wigs and all these things that we think, how on earth could you walk around like that and not look completely mad?
Yeah.
It was sending them around the bend with desire. I think what you're looking at is that maybe trends are transient, but is the appeal of sex appeal, is that kind of, I don't know, timeless? Because I would argue, like, one who's a bit obscure that I would never think I fancied is some chap that I was like, God, he's quite good looking. He's a bit of a geezer. Is this Peter Wicks? Turns out he was on The Only Way is Essex. I know nothing about it. Not remotely like the sort of person I'd usually find appealing, but there's something about it, whether because he's a bit cynical or, and ultimately he's made his career out of reality TV and all these things that I think, God, but there's something about him. And it's funny how, like, other people who are very conventionally appealing, you're like, no.
Nah.
Brad Pitt's never worked for me. The other thing I thought was really interesting is Terry Jones from Monty Python. He might have a very big crush on. I know he's passed away, but still, these things linger. But he was talking this a while ago. I saw this, that gladiators in Roman society were not held in high esteem. It's not a thing. High esteem socially, but were also revered, and women were fanatical about them. In fact, their sweat was used as an aphrodisiac.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. Extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah.
A lot of young men signed up to be gladiators, and I know that's a more convoluted subject in itself, but I mean that maybe isn't so unclear why they were. They're in, they're in the Colosseum fighting. They're strong men. They're sweat. These are all the conventions of what's hot. But then maybe if you look at something like 50 Shades of Grey, it did nothing for me at all. I just thought, oh, it was so gratuitously sexual that I was like, that's not sex appeal. That's just sex. I don't know. What's your kind of opinion? If you're going to say the essence of what is it? Is it intelligence? Is it good looks? Is it an amalgamation? What is it?
It's so difficult to define, isn't it? And I think this conversation could have been had between two women 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago.
Yeah.
I always think about my lovely nan, bless her. My nan came from a family of 4 sisters, and she was around in World War II. She's from Wales, and she lived in quite a small kind of town in Wales, but there was an American army base nearby.
Okay.
And all of her sisters, quite understandably, were very, very into the idea of finding an American man and leaving rural Wales and being able to go and live this glamorous life. And I think they all thought they were going to be film stars. So they would doll themselves up and go out dancing. And eventually 2 of the sisters actually did end up finding American boyfriends and marrying them and having what they kind of desired. And my nan always thought she wanted the same. So she was always like, oh, I'm going to find this tall American with all the teeth and that kind of thing, the really all American boy.
Yeah.
But she ended up falling for my grandfather, who was 5'6" and Welsh. And at first, and she was quite practical about it, and she's quite honest about it, is that she said that one of the only reasons she started courting him was because she wanted his rations, because he was in the army and he was the cook, and he could provide her family with extra rations, and her family were quite poor. So originally she always said that there was this very practical reason why she was courting him, and he was absolutely insanely, you read their letters, and he sent her pictures because he was stationed in India during the war. He is head over heels for this woman, and this woman at first is thinking, well, I could get a bit more butter and some jam. But eventually, whatever that she thought she was looking for with these Americans, she found it with him. And she couldn't exactly explain what it was that made her so drawn to my grandfather in the end, but they ended up being married a very, very long time. She loved him and she also became very possessive about him. And this is going off a little bit of a tangent, but in Madeley there was a lady called Diamond Lil. And Diamond Lil is an absolute icon in Madeley.
Oh, I think she might be, yeah.
She was, think Barbara Windsor, she was amazing, iconic woman. But both sets of grandmothers became very, very, very possessive over their husbands, because they thought that Diamond Lil was going to take them. So my nan went through this journey of being, oh, well, he's all right, but I like the butter more, to how dare you look at my man, I'm going to fight you for it.
Yeah, so little, fair enough, because she sounds like she could take a man.
She could. She's Jolene in Madeley.
Oh, fully Diamond Lil. Yeah,
she is. She's amazing. But I think sometimes the idea of that, what that it is, both historically and now, is very clear. You know what that is, and you know what you're looking for. But equally, I think that it can be very hard to define, because just like my nan couldn't explain what it exactly was about my grandfather that she liked,
Yeah.
I nearly said you can't explain what it is about the waxwork, but you clearly can. I think sometimes it is very difficult to quantify or explain, and I think equally sometimes it is about the way you're treated. If you are treated right, and that sounds so ridiculous, but let's face it, the standards of the way some people treat others is ridiculous. But if you find someone that treats you right and that allows you to be yourself and give you that space for yourself, that is the most attractive thing in the world, is being allowed to be yourself and feel safe and comforted and just embraced for who you are. Because I think so much of modern society as well now forces you into a box of being something. You are this, or you are that, or you have to be this. So being embraced for everything you are and all of your facets is a really powerful thing, and perhaps that's part of what the it is. But I certainly think things like intelligence come into it as well, and humor and stuff like that. But the long short of it is, we don't know, do we?
Well, it's all like, and I love how decent you are, because that's a really nice story. And I love that you're also like, it's about treating you right. And I'm like, meanwhile, the uncle who stoops a bit is banging hot. And you're like, I don't know, he seems quite in love with his ex-wife. Doesn't matter. Don't worry about it, babe.
Change him.
I'll make it work.
Like Trotsky.
He's hot. He's hot. I think that's it. I think it's all things to everyone and others to whomever. But it's one of those, is that, you know, look, personally, I think there's a big aphrodisiac in someone who's good at their job. You could have someone who's not conventionally handsome, but they're like, oh, I do this and this, or they talk at some length in an expert sense about, you know, something to do with history, or they're a doctor or something. You're like, oh, God, that's attractive. You know, so there are the conventions of what most of us will find attractive. And then within that, there's the periphery, or the I was going to say the trebuchets.
I love trebuchets.
Attractive.
They are sexy. Trebuchets are well cool.
Trebuchet. They take ages to launch, though. Tributary, I meant. Maybe it's the subtlety of the trebuchet that appeals to me.
He had me at trebuchet.
Like, are you sure that that's subtle? Yes. But like you say, like the waxwork, Robin Hood, the Fox, whomever, you know, Oliver Reed is belligerently attractive, but it's enhanced. He had this deep voice. He was very well spoken. He was clever. You know, he was probably a bit of a twat as well, but I think he definitely was. But, you know, sometimes when people look at things, they look at animals that maybe their reputation's attractive, like cats. Cats are regularly tied to being quite, not a seductive creature in a offbeat way, but I mean in terms of how they move, their self-confidence, they don't give a shit. You know, people are like, oh, attractive. Whereas dogs are like, hi, I'm a friend.
People like Eartha Kitt were described as being feline, weren't they, in them, her mannerisms and stuff.
Exactly. And dogs are much more like, but, you know, dogs are the ones that maybe, and I love both, that people are like, oh, man's best friend, and cats are like, charisma, you know. So it's interesting that actually a lot of the time those things aren't always bedfellows, you know. But I think, like, if you look at like the Vicar of Dibley, Dawn French in that cast is evidently attractive. Like, do you know what I mean? So she's intelligent, she's articulate, she's a beautiful woman. And I would say that maybe Alice isn't as physically obviously as attractive. She's a more unusual looking woman, but Alice has something about her that you're kind of like, oh, there's really, you know, she, and deliberately is played that way by Emma Chambers, who sadly passed away, did she, years ago, but she plays it in such a way that you kind of go, oh yeah, I get why Hugo is like besotted by her. And, you know, David Horton is an older Tory man in a tweed suit, and you're like, yeah, I like a well-dressed man, but there's something quite sexy about David Horton. You know, maybe there's a suppressed Tory in me or something, but you know, there isn't. Listeners, don't panic. But I think it's
I was panicking then.
Yeah, you're like, oh, and recording has stopped, but
just click leave.
Yeah, you're like, Amy's left. But I think it's the, you know, that there is, what is it like? I like his confidence. I like his, you know, There's just something about him. And Harry, her husband, in the end, is really handsome, but lacks charisma for me. But then other people swoon. I suppose it's like anything. I just think, we've brought our listeners on a pointless journey of what's the history of sex appeal. No one fucking knows. No one knows, because it was exactly, it was elusive then. It's elusive now. I think, like listening to Meghan Markle say, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've got a very handsome husband. It's like, oh, no, you haven't. Like, sorry, Meghan, but you haven't. But she clearly thinks so. And I'm sure there's lots of people that do. But, it was just, I only know that because I saw it on Instagram the other day. But I just think it's interesting that people will swoon about somebody, and then other people who maybe, like I say, Donald Sutherland's probably a good example of sexual charisma. I think he's not late Donald is not conventionally maybe handsome in the way that like a young Johnny Depp was or whatever, but he really screams charisma. I think. I was talking to my mum, and she always liked Robbie Coltrane in Cracker. She was like, yeah. I was like, yeah, it's because he's clever and he's tall. I think it's a fascinating thing. And I suppose the unity with us in the past is that we love a bad boy.
Yes, that's very much the case, isn't it? Yeah.
William the Conqueror, Gilles de Rais. Maybe not Gilles de Rais, that's a bit bad, but, Guy of Gisborne. We love somebody.
Vlad the Impaler.
Yeah, Vlad the Impaler, Peter the Great. Oh, boys. We love you. And here's looking at the ones that don't exist. Robin Hood. We love somebody who doesn't exist. But it's funny, somebody probably didn't exist. Still, we know exactly what he looked like. Bill Sikes didn't exist. I mean, he did. There was lots of men like Bill Sikes, but you know exactly what Bill Sikes looked like.
Yeah.
You're like, that's why Nancy liked him. But I think it's, you could have a really strong actor playing Sikes, and if he's not as hot as Ollie Reed, he's not nailing it, is he? You've got to be Oliver Reed or Tom Hardy, really. And even then, Tom Hardy didn't get it quite like Ollie did. But yeah, it's that elusive thing. I don't think we'll ever know. But sexual charisma, that's the great mystery, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So there we go. Right, we've gone on, namely because I've absolutely banged on for ages, so I apologize. Amy, is there anything you want to add about the history of sex appeal before we draw to a close?
I think there isn't, because I feel like this is going to be something that we return to, even either on purpose and purposely, or it's something that we will inadvertently end up discussing in different periods of history and things like that. So I think
perhaps one of the historians you talk to.
Maybe, you never know.
Our guest.
But I do feel like it's so inwoven. Inwoven isn't a word, is it? It's so woven and
inwoven
into the narrative of so many things, like folklore and so many even historical crimes and things like that. There's innumerable people that talk about how they can change absolute serial killers. So I feel that we'll either return to this either accidentally, or it'll be something that we return to by looking at sex appeal in a specific period, like the early modern or Georgian would be fascinating, because there's so many like Georgian plays and literature that is just sex.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think we've done a very good introduction into this topic. We've looked at some of the key threads, and we've ultimately said that like so much of it is that it's probably so personal to that person what that it is, that's why sometimes you struggle to articulate it, because you can't really understand what it is that makes that it.
I think that's a really good point. That's really good. And I think if anyone, I'm sure you haven't stayed with us this far. They've got like that. We've told some good stories about King Arthur, which is great. And then also they're like, yeah, the other one fancies a waxwork and the bloke from the Secret Garden. You'd be like, that's what I took away from this.
No.
But yeah, I think, I don't know, maybe it's in a voice, maybe it's in a nice face, maybe it's in dark hair, red hair, blonde hair, who knows? I think it's exclusive to you, to us, to whomever. It's that mystique of charisma in it. So look, we will be back next week. We're doing murder. So on from sex appeal to murdering people. But thank you so much. We hope you enjoy it. Thank you for everything, for nominating us, for supporting us, for being the loyal listeners that you all are. And if you're new, welcome. And if you're a returner, thank you. And take care, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Good night. Good night.